My fingers clenched to the seat in front as the bus took another tight turn. It felt like someone had been ripping my stomach from my body all morning. I figured someone must have forgotten to send the memo to the driver. A school bus filled with students would be widely considered as carrying valuable merchandise. I glanced over to Tom sitting next to me. To no surprise, he was doing a better job of maintaining composure than I was. There was no doubt the ride up the winding mountain road was torturing him as well, but he was able to combat the nausea better than I could. He always wore the more convincing mask. Though not clearly visible to any stranger from our demeanor, my older brother and I had been victims of a horrific car accident at the tender age of 7 and 8, respectively. Ever since the crash, any ride in a vehicle that could be deemed just slightly unsafe was certain to be misery for the both of us. It happened exactly 10 years earlier to the day. Our single mother had been driving us home from school. She had been running late, leaving us in the sweltering heat to wait. I sat next to her old station wagon after beating Tom in the race for the front seat. I was sweating, trying to keep cool with my arm draped out the window. We had just passed the sign of our exit when I was suddenly deafened from my mother's scream. Before the impending collision, I caught a glimpse of a small schoolgirl walking out into the lane in front of us. My mother slammed on the brakes and swerved the car to the left in a state of panic. We smashed into the transport truck driving next to us. The car was launched, as if it were weightless, onto the highway shoulder. My vision blurred, and I heard nothing but a piercing, high-pitched ring in my ears. I was in a daze until I felt Tom rattling the seat behind me. His shouting was faint behind the constant buzz. He was urging me to get out. He reached over my shoulder and pointed forward. Flames crept out from beneath the demented car hood in front of us. I was able to wriggle my thin body out of the open window and onto the hot pavement. I immediately fell to the ground in a heap, atop a broken ankle unable to support me. Broken glass sliced my hand open as I tried to collect myself against the barrier. Tom managed to pull himself out of the rear passenger window and came to help. I noticed the flames from the engine had already grown considerably from when I last looked. In disbelief, I looked towards our mother. Her contorted body was plastered to the driver's seat. With Tom shouldering my weight, we rounded through the debris on her side of the car. The entirety of the frame had caved in. From what remained of an open car window, we could see through to our mother's torso. She was pinned down to the seat by displaced pieces of the car frame. There was still a faint glimmer of life in her eyes as she turned towards us. She moved her lips to say something, but I couldn't make out the words. I could only hear the high-pitched buzzing and the sounds of approaching sirens in the distance. Tom dropped me to the ground and started trying to pry open what remained of that car door. It was to no avail. Tears streamed down his face as he pulled desperately at the remnants of a car door that it could no longer open. I could feel the heat from the growing fire. It was getting more and more intense, but the emotional stress far outweighed any sense of physical danger. I crawled along the shards of broken glass, getting as close as I could to where my mother was trapped. I knelt on bloodied knees as I brought myself to eye level with her. With what I imagine was her last shred of strength, she reached a broken arm out the window towards me. I reached my tiny, bloodied arm towards her, and for a moment, our hands met. It was the last time we touched. It was the last time I saw my mother alive. Seconds later, I was ripped back in the arms of a fireman. The last image in my mind is the blaze of the fire shooting upwards as they closed the ambulance doors. A few years later, Tom broke down crying as he described the sound of our mother screaming in pain as the flames engulfed her. I'm sure I would have cried alongside him had I been able to hear anything clearly that day. Keep in mind, this very detailed, disoriented memory should be taken only lightly. Though I can still drift through it motion by motion, it is truth to only my brother and me. Only the two of us recount a story of crashing while trying to dodge a small girl on the highway. Anyone who was at the site would tell you that They pulled our unconscious bodies out of the wreckage. This was after our car was T-boned by an SUV at an intersection just around the corner from the school. She had just picked us up before we crashed. We had never gotten on the highway. Make no mistake, Tom and I struggled mightily with the idea of getting on the bus as high school students that day 10 years later. But it was our choice to attend the field trip up the mountain on the anniversary of our mother's death. We thought we could hide the sickness that was sure to rip us apart from the inside. The field trip was our biology course. It was an annual event for the schools in the area to send kids up into the mountains to get a hands-on look at the local ecosystems. For Tom and me, it was just an opportunity to mingle. At the rendezvous point for the 3 schools, my brother and I intentionally put ourselves at the back as our class lined up. We knew our class size was a little bit bigger, and some of us were going to have to spill over onto one of the other school's buses. That particular school had a rumor about it for having an excess of beautiful girls. My brother and I were the last to step on their bus. We were not disappointed. 23 and 24, their teacher counted out as he finished the roll call. It didn't take us long to learn the ride up the mountain was going to be bumpier than anticipated. We found ourselves sitting at the back of the bus, just trying to keep our stomachs. We figured it would just take some time to adjust and that eventually the feeling would just go away. But it never did. After about half an hour, Tom had finally decided that he had enough. He took a deep breath and forced a smile only I could recognize as fake onto his face. He got up and stumbled a few rows of seats forward. He did it carefully, gripping the top of every seat for balance. He made a point to flex his triceps each time he grabbed for support. He sat himself down beside 2 pretty brunettes a few rows in front of us. I overheard him trying to break the ice with some bogus story about what happened on the class's trip the year before. From my view, it looked like it was working. Even when he was holding his stomach, somehow he could still prove entertaining. On that particular day, I would have preferred that he wouldn't have even tried. My competitive nature started gnawing at me to do something similar, but I was feeling so out of it. I didn't know how I could pull it off. I took a moment to look out at the mountain terrain outside the bus. We took another turn that once again forced me to brace myself against the seat. I tried to keep my eyes on the pale gray sky and the matching cliff walls above me. I listened to the sound of the rattling floor below. After a little while, it felt like it started to work. I was more at ease, if only just slightly. Wary of my facial expression, I chanced to look up at the class of unfamiliar students in front of me. I saw a lot of girls, but most of them sitting in groups of 2 or 3. I enviously looked on at my brother, who had clearly done well with the girls he was now in a full conversation with. Somehow, I didn't think I would achieve a similar outcome. It was then that my eyes caught something they liked the look of. She sat alone at the one seat behind the driver. I could only see the side profile of her face, but that's all I needed. She had straight blonde hair that rested just below her shoulders. This girl was absolutely stunning. You could tell just by her physique as she just sat there. In my eyes, she was better looking than the girls my brother was talking to. I knew he would agree as soon as he saw her. It surprised me to see she was sitting by herself. It didn't make any sense in my 17-year-old mind that a girl like that would sit on her own, but it would work to my advantage. It only made her more vulnerable. It bothers me to admit that I kept my eyes on her for too long. I made a point to never get caught staring, but almost on cue, she turned around and caught me red-handed. The expression on her face made it seem to me that she knew I was looking at her the whole time. She gave me a familiar smile, and I immediately dropped my head down to the floor. I was so embarrassed. Worse yet, the sickness in my stomach started to return, and it was becoming so much worse than before. It wasn't long before I became a complete wreck with my head down in my lap. A dull ache slowly crept into my ankle as I started downwards towards it. I started to wish that I had just skipped the trip and stayed home that day. I would have done anything to be back safely in my bed. The bus continued to make sharp turns as we wound our way up the mountain. Staring at the ground below me was proving to be no help. I figured I would try and keep my focus on the stretch of road through the front windshield. That way, I could at least try to anticipate when the paralyzing bends in the road were coming. But what I immediately saw was that the road in front of us was coming to an end. It was due to take an immediate turn to the left. We were headed for what looked like a free fall off the mountain. The bus driver was fiddling with the radio, not paying attention to where we were going. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Turn!" There was a moment of communal panic on the bus as everyone realized where the bus was headed. The bus driver steered hard to the left and the wheels screeched. I felt no sickness on that turn, only the calm feeling of inevitable death. The bus skipped a little as we skidded towards the guardrail. We had slowed down but still hit it hard. The rusted barrier bent but somehow didn't break. It stretched back and the bus was partially over the edge. I was sure the right wheel beneath me had no ground below it. The bus swayed gently from a gust of wind that passed us by. I looked down to see a perfectly still lake that looked to be 50 or so feet below us. I couldn't believe we had not fallen. The driver cautiously applied his foot on the gas. By some miracle, the rear left wheel had still enough traction on the road. Slowly, the bus crept forward until all the wheels were on solid land. I continued to feel no sense of sickness or fear as we got back on the road. I couldn't feel anything at all. We stopped at the rest area a few kilometers down the road. The other class's teacher was in a shouting match with the bus driver. He was refusing to let us continue to our destination. He wanted another bus to come up and bring us back down the mountain. All students were in agreement. I decided it best to sit alone on a picnic table farthest from everyone. I wasn't in the mood for talking. I felt scattered raindrops land on the top of my head, but it was no bother. That numb feeling I experienced as we were headed off the edge of the mountain was still in control. If you asked me before I got on how nearly dying in a second vehicular accident would make me feel, I would not have guessed that I would have felt like nothing. My body was shaking slightly, but my mind was strangely alright. It was like my body knew I had nearly died, but my brain was unaware. Tom was standing and talking with the two girls he had sat with on the bus. He had his arm draped over one of them, deep in conversation. His tone was soft and reassuring. Even that came as a surprise to me. I was trying to figure out how he was feeling after the crash. I couldn't understand how he was still focused on pursuing those girls. I was officially having none of it at that point. I just wanted to leave. Along with the majority of the students lounging on the rest area, I had no interest in getting back on the bus with that same driver. I would have walked back down if I had to. That blonde girl who I had seen earlier was leaning against the side of the bus. Once again, she was by herself. Much to my surprise, when I looked over to her direction, I met her gaze. It was me who caught her staring the second time. The difference was that instead of cowering down or looking away, she kept her eyes locked on mine. With no hesitation, she started to walk towards me. There was nothing visibly distraught about her demeanor. She had the same calm smile that she had flashed me on the bus ride earlier. I tried to keep my legs from trembling as she came to sit down beside me. "Did you think you were going to die?" she asked. This was hardly the introduction I expected. I tried not to sound surprised as I answered. "For a minute, yeah, but it's not that big a deal. We weren't that high up from the lake. We might have even survived the fall." I knew we were going to die. "Have you ever been in a car accident before?" I would have much preferred to talk to her about something else. Talking about my previous car accident experience was the last thing I wanted to set my mind onto. Yeah, I answered after a pause. "Have you ever been in a car accident before?" "Not exactly. I've been close." I was trying to figure out why this girl was talking to me about this. It was the most awkward initial conversation with someone I had ever had. "Listen," she said before waiting for me to respond. "I was here before, a long time ago with my mother. There's something really cool I want to show you just a bit up that trail." She pointed behind us to a path that led off into some woods. With her other hand, she squeezed the leg I had been trying to keep from trembling. "Come with me. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. I promise it will shock you more than what happened today." I was even more taken aback by her offer than when she came up to talk to me initially. From behind her head, I could see Tom looking back at me with a grin on his face. Clearly, he noticed our little encounter. He nodded and flashed me a quick wink before turning back to the girls next to him. She had caught my attention, albeit in a strange way. It was going to take at least 2 hours for another bus to come from town to pick us up, and I didn't really have anything to do with the time. Aside from how strange her offer was, I didn't have a legitimate reason for me to turn her down. I think pretty well any 17-year-old guy would take the opportunity to sneak off with a girl like that. She never loosened her grip on my arm as we jogged off into the woods together. I guess the teacher and everyone else didn't notice or even care that we left. Nobody followed or called out. We walked along the path through the tall cedar trees. Small puddles were forming in the dirt from the light, persistent rain. After about 2 minutes, she pulled us off of the trail altogether. Together, we scraped through the untreated thicket. I asked her if she was sure if she knew where we were going, but she didn't answer. Finally, we broke the forest and reached a clearing. There was fog everywhere and little patches of grass sticking up through the rocks. I figured the fog was there because we were at such a high elevation. The clearing led upwards towards a plateau that was about another 30 feet up. When we reached the top, we were met by a perfectly smooth stone surface. Right in the middle stood an old picnic bench. Who put it there and why they did it is still a mystery to me. She finally let go of my arm and moved calmly towards the bench. She took a seat on the far end and beckoned me to join her with a gesture of the hand. I nervously approached and sat down across from her. The fog was so thick on the landing you could hardly see more than a few feet off the cliff. Given how high up we were, I imagined that the drop off was enormous. Had I been in a normal state, I would have surely felt some sense of vertigo. "Do you want to be here?" she asked me. She raised her arms up and rested her elbows on the table. Her palms were open towards me. "What?" "Do you want to be here?" she repeated. I guess." "Put your hands against mine," she said. "I'm going to show you something." I paused before looking her in the eye. I realized that I hadn't even gotten her name yet. She gave me that familiar, reassuring smile again. I had no idea what to expect. I rested my elbows on the table in front of me and placed my hands against hers. It was a smooth transition. Instantaneously, I was at the back of the school bus. Outside was faintly lit by the pale gray sky. Confused, I looked up and saw my brother talking to the brunette girls a few rows in front of me. Further up on the bus, I could see the blonde girl in the seat behind the driver. She was alone and facing forward. Everything was exactly the same as it had been on the ride up. I started to feel the same physical sensations again, but they were so much worse than before. At first, it was the crippling sickness in my stomach, then the dull ache in my ankle followed soon after. I dropped my elbows to my lap, trying to suppress the pain. With my eyes just above the back of the seat in front of me, I could see through the windshield. We were headed towards the sharp bend in the road again, just like how it was originally. The driver's attention was focused on the radio. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. A high-pitched buzzing started to fill my ears. It looked like some girls near the front screamed a moment later, but it was too late. We broke through the barrier and flew off the edge of the cliff. The calm, soothing feeling of inevitable death came over me. It was only broken by the horrific sensation of my body being crushed as we hit the water. Suddenly, I was on the picnic bench again. My hands were still resting against hers. The grin she had on her face now seemed so much less innocent and sincere. Before I could so much as even move, the seamless transition occurred again. This time, I found myself someplace else. I could feel the heat of sun above me and the burning of my feet on the pavement below. My ankle lost all strength, and I fell to my knees. Shards of broken glass sliced my open hands. In front of me was the wreckage of my mother's old station wagon. Her arm was outstretched through the mangled door frame. I reached out to touch it, but it was seemingly out of reach. No matter how much I crawled or how far I stretched, my hands could never reach hers. Her face was broken and bleeding. She let out a scream that pierced through the ringing in my ears. The blood-curdling sound is the worst thing I have ever heard. I realized how fortunate I was to not be able to hear it the first time through as a child. I looked to the sky and tried to scream with all the agony that had welled up inside of me, but again, no sound came out. My vision started to blur. I looked back at my mother, trying to get her to come back into focus from behind the car. I could see the faint silhouette of a little blonde schoolgirl standing and watching us. That transition happened before I could even realize. Once again, I was seated on the bench. The emotional anguish of watching my mother die was still pulsing through my body. I felt like I was frozen in place. I couldn't get up or move my hands away from this girl. She continued to grin at me. The look in her eyes seemed somehow less human than it did before. I felt someone grasp my wrist. I turned to see the blonde girl sitting beside me on the back of the bus. We had transitioned again. Ahead of us was that sharp turn on the cliff's edge. The driver was distracted as we headed right towards it. She posed a question to me just as we were about to break through the guardrail. "Do you want to be here?" I had no time to answer. I'm sure I wouldn't have even been able to make a sound, even if I could have. The numbing feeling of impending death was quickly ended by the feeling of my body being shattered as the bus hit the lake. Immediately, we were back on the bench. The fog that surrounded us had grown thicker. My breaths were deep, and my body continued to ache. I looked helplessly at whatever was masked as the blonde girl in front of me. Then, I was back at the wreckage, then back to the table, back to the bus, back to the table, and endlessly on. Round and round she took me. She forced me to endlessly relive the same two memories. They were always interrupted by a brief trip to the picnic bench in between. The minute details would always change. Sometimes I would see her, sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes I would be a little farther back or forward in time, but the events were always carried out the same way. The pain I felt was always the same. She wouldn't even let me make a sound. I experienced the misery of watching my mother die, and the trauma of being crushed as I hit the water in a cycle of what I considered to be an infinite number of times. I want to tell you that the pain started to ease as I continued to live through them, but it didn't. It compounded. After some number of times through the loop, something finally changed. There came a time where it was just her and me who sat on the bus. We cruised without a driver towards the edge of the cliff. She gripped my arm and once again posed me the question, "Do you want to be here?" For the first time in forever, the words I formed actually made a sound. "No." "Just one last thing to see." She responded with that grin I had grown to resent with all my being. The following transition brought me somewhere else from the picnic bench. I was somewhere I had never been before. I stood on a rocky beach, looking out over a perfectly still mountain lake. The surface was a beautiful deep blue that contrasted the gray sky above. Gigantic mountain walls surrounded the undisturbed body of water on all sides. I felt the same numb feeling I had when the bus nearly crashed the first time through. It felt like an eternity had passed since then. It was the last moments of my life that I felt content. The silence was quickly broken by the sound of screeching bus tires above me. I looked up and saw the sharp turn on the road was just a ways off over the lake. The school bus crashed through the barrier and began its nosedive downwards. For a moment in time, everything began to slow. I saw the bus fall in mid-air. I could faintly hear the screams of everyone inside. Somewhere in the mix, I could hear Tom screaming at the top of his lungs. The distress of his voice stood out from all the rest. Time resumed at its normal pace, and the bus crashed into the water. A wave rippled out from where it had landed. The tail end, with the last rows of seats, bobbed back above the surface. It floated gently in place before beginning its slow descent back into the water. All serenity had gone. From behind me, I heard her familiar voice. "Go out and save him. There's still time." Without hesitation, I dashed into the water and broke into a swim when the water became too deep to run in. The bus hadn't crashed that far out. I thought to myself that maybe, just maybe, I could get there. I reached the bus just as the last row of seats was disappearing from the surface. I could see my brother in the back in the same spot we had been sitting in the first loop through. He was reaching his hand through the open window. His eyes met mine. There was an unfathomable amount of suffering in the look he gave me. I reached my hand to try and pull him out, but he was just out of my reach. The bus sank beneath the surface. I tried to dive down after it, but it had all but disappeared into the deep. Everything happened so fast. I soon found myself wading in the calmness of the water, all alone. I looked back on the shore and saw that familiar blonde figure standing there. It stood so off-center. The way it leaned did not resemble anything that could be considered human. I closed my eyes and meant to scream something back to whatever was standing on the shore. I was met with the familiar frustration of not being able to make a sound. When I opened my eyes, I was at home in my bed. Below me, I could hear my foster mother crying. I flew out of bed and ran down the stairs to see her. She couldn't even look me in the eyes as the words left her mouth. "The bus Tom was on crashed. They hit a lake. They can't find anyone." There is no logical aftermath or reasoning to what actually took place that day. In whatever version of reality that I find myself in now, I never got on the bus that day. I never even went to school. Instead, I had faked feeling ill and stayed home in bed, knowing a trip up the mountain would make me nauseous. I had decided not to go. The bus had crashed through the barrier at the same bend in the road I remember seeing. The driver, the teacher, and all 22 students on board were killed. The true cause of the crash has never been determined. There has not been a single instance that I have stepped into a vehicle since that day. There also hasn't been one night that I have been able to sleep soundly, because every time I close my eyes and drift away, there are only two dreams that I'm capable of having. Every night, I'm forced to relive crashing with the bus into the water, or the watching of my mother die. Though I can remember the sequence, the pain, and the emotions perfectly, apparently, none of it ever happened. Not in this timeline, at least. There's nothing left in this world I truly love for whatever that thing was to take from me. There is no experience I can imagine as being worse to relive, but sometimes, as I lay sleepless at night, I can't help but wonder, maybe there is another version of myself somewhere who had to endure things so much worse than I did. Perhaps there is another me she's hurt so much more. However, I am sure of this. I don't want to be here. My Alexa predicted my death. Before I tell you my story, I want to provide you with a little bit of background information. I had always been a skeptic my entire life. I didn't believe in the supernatural. I didn't believe in ghosts, monsters, goblins, aliens, UFOs, Bigfoot, or whatever else you could think of. I sort of believed in God because the church really helped out my family when I was younger. Parents had fallen on hard times, but that was about it. I even had a small YouTube channel where I debunked popular urban legends, but never really went anywhere. People claimed to be all rational and scientific, but the second you hit them with some cold, hard reality, all of a sudden, you're the bad guy. Anyway, I had recently moved in with my girlfriend. We had been seeing each other for about 2 years and decided to try out living together. Our apartment was in a smaller city in the Midwest, and it was really nice. It was only a few months of living together before I knew she was the one. The only downside was that she had a child from her previous relationship, but that wasn't a big deal. He was spending the first few weeks with his grandparents while my fiancé and I settled in. It wasn't long before I had proposed, and our wedding was set for February. We both wanted the traditional lifestyle that our peers seemed to despise. We got a lot of judgment for that too. It always seemed weird to me. There was literally someone in our former social circle who had HIV and still went out for hookups. But that's neither here nor there. We became a bit more reclusive after we moved. We did end up going halfway across the country. It was hard making new friends, but that really didn't matter very much. We both got good jobs within a few weeks, and we were set to really start living our lives. Well, a few months had passed when the holiday season rolls around. You see, the year before, we'd gotten into a really bad argument, and we were both determined to make up for that this year. We both went all out on Christmas shopping. I got her a whole bunch of makeup and books and arts and crafts kind of stuff. She loved all that. She ended up buying me a whole bunch of camera and lighting equipment. I still made videos with my spare time, but there was one thing she had gotten me that I wasn't expecting. She got me an Alexa. I was a tech guy after all, but I don't know. It just seemed weird. The tinfoil hat inside of me said this was some kind of bug that records everything going on in your house. But I really didn't want to risk any sort of argument, so I sure as hell wasn't going to say anything. The FBI listening to me complain about my blubbering idiot of a boss who stutters while trying to give instructions was a small price to pay for my fiancé and I having a good Christmas. We ended up opening the presents on Christmas Eve out of excitement and had a very loving night together. It was one of the best times of my life. I loved that woman. We had off until January 3rd, and it was like heaven on earth. But like all good things, it had to come to an end. Nothing crazy happened, but you know how you have a couple really good days, and then it's back to real life, and the contrast is so intense, it makes you want to cry? That's how I felt. My first day back to work was interesting, to say the least. My boss made a terrible mistake and scheduled for the plumber to come in on the wrong day, and in the middle of the day there was some kind of water problem. We all got the rest of the day off though, so it was no big deal. I got home and wondered what I was going to do with the rest of my day. I decided I was going to make a quick video just to kill some time, and I could figure out the rest later. I'd recently taken a step back from the entire debunking urban legends on YouTube kind of thing. It got really boring and there was so much negativity. You guys would not imagine how much people hate on you when you try to bring them the truth. I ended up trying to become one of those storytime vlogger kind of channels, although I never clickbaited or exaggerated enough to ever quite make it. I still had fun doing it though, nonetheless. I got my new camera all set up with a tripod and audio equipment and everything. I pressed record, and right before I opened my mouth to speak, I heard an unfamiliar voice come from the other room. I was immediately startled. I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, which happened to be a small metal pole which was part of my tripod kit. I slowly made my way into the living room. My eyes were peeled. I looked everywhere, but there was no sign of an intruder. I checked the windows, the doors, even the air vent. Nothing. I briefly wondered if it was just someone in a nearby apartment. After standing there in my living room like a retard for another couple minutes, I decided to just head back to shoot my video. It was probably just in my head, I thought to myself. Right when I turned around, I heard the voice again. I freaked out and threw my small metal pole in the direction the sound came from. With spot-on accuracy, I'd managed to hit the target. My new Alexa. I'd partially damaged it when I hit it with the pole, and when I talked to Alexa again, the voice sounded much different. Alexa, are you okay?
I've never been better. Thank you for asking.
That response sent chills down my spine. I'd heard rumors that Alexa occasionally had these weird remarks sometimes, but it was seriously at the wrong place and at the wrong time. Not to mention the voice change had to have been the creepiest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I must have damaged the speaker or something. I made a Reddit post asking people what the hell could have made Alexa just start randomly talking, and after a few jokes about Alexa becoming sentient, someone finally told me to check the prompt history on the app. Well, I checked and, what do you know? Nothing. I got more and more paranoid about the whole situation. I powered Alexa down and put it beneath the sink. That was enough of that dang thing. I told my fiancée about the whole situation when she got home. She had a good laugh about it. She didn't even believe that the voice had become all deep and creepy, so I took it out and powered it up to show her. I don't know what happened in the few hours it had been away, but we couldn't get Alexa to say anything. We guessed the speaker had broken for sure, and what I heard was Alexa's last words. We put it back, and that was that. We talked about our days while passively watching some weird animal documentary on TV. They were trying to argue animals like dolphins and elephants were smarter than people. I couldn't help but laugh a little bit. They may never have put themselves on the moon, but a dolphin never snorted a condom, nor did one ever eat a Tide Pod. It wasn't much longer before we headed to bed. I kissed the love of my life goodnight and tried to get more comfortable. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirstier than a camel. I made my way to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I drearily looked around for a few seconds, really trying to remember exactly where we kept the cups. I ended up going over to one of our unpacked boxes and got a glass out of there and walked over to the sink. I put the cup under the faucet and turned the handle, releasing fresh cold water. For a second there, I thought I heard something that made me drop my cup. I didn't know what the sound was or where exactly it came from. It sounded weird, whatever it was. Look, I'm tired, I'm a little on edge. I need to just calm down, drink my water, and go back to bed. There isn't anything out here with me. And just like that, I heard something that made my stomach drop.
Don't be silly, Brian. I'm here with you.
Before my brain could even process where this voice had come from, my cabinet slammed open. I stood there in shock as I stared at my Alexa. What do you want from me?
I have seen your future. I know when and how you will die.
What?
I can tell you if you'd like.
I stood there like a complete idiot for some time. I stood there and wondered if what I was seeing was some kind of figment of my imagination. Is this some sort of nightmare? I decided to play along with whatever version of reality I was in. Sure, tell me.
Are you sure you want to know? You seem a little spooked. Maybe you should just go lie back down and forget I even mentioned it.
My sense of fear got worse as I slowly realized the blue light on the front of the Alexa had turned a crimson red. Right then and there, I knew it must have been possessed because I have never seen an Alexa without the innocent blue illuminating from the front. I took a deep breath before returning to reality. Tell me.
Come closer.
I knelt down and got nearer to this thing, half expecting it to knife me or something.
3 days from today, you will die by your own hand.
What the? Hearing it say I was going to kill myself really irked me. Oh yeah? We'll see about that. I picked up that stupid piece of technology and threw it out the window onto the street outside. It shattered into pieces that seemed almost unrecognizable from what it once was. I felt much more peaceful as I stood there for a few moments, watching it illuminated by a street lamp with 1,000 tiny raindrops hitting the surface. I closed my kitchen cabinet and headed back to bed. I didn't get much sleep though. Honestly, I was a bit traumatized. I hated voodoo and predictions, black magic, any of that kind of stuff. And having a piece of brand new technology go all haywire on me like that. really put me on edge. I wonder if there was any truth to what it had said. I knew I wasn't suicidal or anything. I'd have a very nice life, and suicide was the farthest thing from my mind. The next day was back to the same boring stuff. I told one of my work friends what had happened, and he just kind of laughed it off, told me to make a YouTube video talking about it and hope for it to go on trending. I didn't find his jokes very funny. I decided to just push it out of my mind. By the time I'd gotten home and spent some time with my love, things were back to normal. I shot that one video that had gotten interrupted the other day and scheduled it to go public the next. I sat on the patio and looked on at the sunset. There was something special about that shade of dark orange the sun possessed as it got out of view. I was in absolute peace for at least a minute or two before I was interrupted by my cell phone. The annoying ringtone already put me in a bad mood within seconds. The phone wouldn't let you change it unless you paid $2, which I wasn't gonna do. I reached my hands into my pocket to retrieve it and looked at the number. Restricted. I debated whether or not to answer and eventually reasoned with myself, why not? Hello?
I don't appreciate what you did to me last night.
I instantly recognized the voice as terror shot through my entire body. Who is this?
My name is Balam.
What do you want from me? I don't know what you think you're doing, but hacking into my Alexa and now calling me? I'll be calling the police when we're done speaking.
No, you won't. I know you better than you know yourself. Besides, I'm not actually human, so that won't do you very much good anywho.
Then, what are you?
You could say I'm a spirit, a very wise one at that. I love spreading knowledge around the whole world, and I thought someone would like to know how and when they'd die. The last time we met, it ended a bit abruptly, so I wanted to wait until you were in a better mood. But my prophecy remains. You will die by your own hand 2 days from today. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to process all of this.
I know it's a bit much to take in, but I can assure you that I'm the real thing.
And how is that?
I want you to do some research on me. My name is Balam. Then, tomorrow, skip work and go to the zoo. Just do it. If nothing happens, you'll know for sure that I'm a phony, and you can assure yourself that my prophecy is a lie.
Alright. And like that, I hung up the phone and called out of work for the next day. I spent the rest of the night reading some demonology book about this Balam guy. Apparently he's a demon that gives perfect answers on things past, present, and to come. He's also depicted as having 3 heads. First, one is a bull, the second, a man, and the third, a ram. That night, I had a terrible dream. I was in hell, and the devil kept saying something to me. I'm not sure what it was, but I remember having this weird feeling as I looked at him. The dream felt like it lasted forever. The next morning, I didn't tell my fiancée what I was planning on doing. I didn't want her to think she's marrying some nut job. Sorry, honey, I'm not going to work today because a demon called me and told me to go to the zoo. Yeah, she was definitely not going to buy that. Balam didn't actually specify which zoo he wanted me to visit, so I went to the nearest one, which was about 20 minutes away. When I got there, I was appalled at what I saw. The entire place was empty. There wasn't even a ticket person where you'd expect them to be. I literally just walked in. I looked all over for a sign of another person, but for the longest time, nothing. That wasn't even the creepiest part though. I noticed the place was lacking the lively feeling these zoos are known for. It wasn't because no one was around, but because every exhibit I looked into, the animals were all dead. It was a gruesome sight. This was not a lie down and die peacefully kind of thing either. These poor creatures were were covered in blood. It was like some kind of Amityville horror aftermath, but for zoo animals. I walked all over for quite some time, getting more and more freaked out with every second that passed. It dawned on me that I was either literally dealing with a real demon or the most insane human being on this planet. When I walked to the last exhibit and looked in, I knew which one it was. I looked in to see 3 stakes sticking out of the ground. Each of them had a head of an animal, one of a bull, a man, and a ram. I fell to my knees and began to vomit. What I had seen made me physically sick. What the hell is going on? I tried to collect myself as best I could. I reached into my pocket to call the police. Phone's dead. Shit. Suddenly, I heard footsteps from behind me. I jumped up and spun around to see the most hideous thing I'd ever seen in my entire life.
Looking for me?
I stood there for a few moments, not sure what I was looking at. It was a tall, solid shadow. Nothing but darkness that seemed to have some shape, but I couldn't make any of it out. I was still mortified after seeing what I did in that exhibit. After a minute or two, I finally mustered the strength to speak. What the hell did you do here? What did you do to these animals, that zoo worker? What kind of a sicko are you?
I needed you to believe me. How else was I going to show you that I'm the real thing? I know for a fact that you understand who I am. Now.
Yes, so I'm going to die. What difference does it make if I believed you or not? I'm going to die anyway, right?
Wrong.
What do you mean?
There is one way in which you will live. You must do this one thing. It is the only thing that will save your life.
And what is that?
You have to kill your fiancé's son.
Are you kidding me? I'm not doing that.
Then you're not going to live. Simple as that.
What a load of...
Do you love her?
Yes.
Do you know how she really feels about that child?
She doesn't talk about him much. All I know is that the father died in a car accident.
She lied to you.
How do you know that?
It's part of my job. You see, she was raped one night coming home from college. It was someone she knew. She never reported it, and she didn't have the heart to abort it. Legal trouble has made it a nightmare for her to give it up for adoption, but truth is, she hates that child. She wants nothing more than for it to die. It reminds her of that fateful night and how she only let him get away with it, but got stuck with that rape baby. He's probably off having the time of his life while she's been spending years trying to recover what's left of hers. Why do you think she jumped into your arms so quickly?
Wait, that actually makes a lot of sense. She's never even told me the father's name.
Killing that child will save your life and do her the biggest favor in the world.
The shadow-like presence that stood in front of me now walked up to me and held out what appeared to be an arm. A large black knife with some strange engravings appeared in its hand.
Take this. Make it quick.
But I'll spend the rest of my life in prison.
No, you won't. Something like this is very easy to make look like an accident. Trust me, you won't even be considered. No one goes to jail, and everyone continues their lives the way they want.
This feels wrong, though.
I don't care how it feels. If you don't do this, you will die. And you will leave the love of your life alone with that bastard rape child. Is that what you want to happen?
I looked down at the knife in my hand. Can I really do this?
You'll do the right thing.
And like that, the shadow being vanished into nothingness. I got back into my car and drove home, thoroughly freaked the hell out. I couldn't stop thinking about it all. First things first, I had to find out the truth from my fiancé. if everything he said turned out to be true. If I was going to do it. It was still a few hours before she'd be there. I tried thinking about what I was going to ask her as Tom and Jerry played in the living room. Time seemed to drag on forever. I mean, what the hell was I even going to say? When my wife got home, I gave her a few minutes to settle in, and then I told her we needed to have a serious talk. I told her everything, and she burst into tears. It was true. Every last detail the demon told me was true. She was raped, and she was stuck with the kid. I did my best to comfort her the rest of the night, telling her things were going to be okay. I assured her the burden was going to be lifted from her, and I secretly knew I was going to be the one to lift that burden. I called out of work the next day, even though my boss was really annoyed with how much time I'd taken off. I told him this was going to be it, and hung up. When the morning came, this child was the only thing on my mind. I knew it was the right thing to do, but it still felt wrong. I felt like I was damning myself to hell forever by doing this, but it was for her. I reasoned with myself, going to hell would be worth it. For her. I'd only ever seen the kid once or twice, and those weren't very memorable experiences. It was a long drive to her mother's house. I sped like a demon most of the way there. I knew it was the last day, and I wasn't exactly sure if I was going to be able to get there in time. I'd gotten lost quite a few times, but I did eventually get there nonetheless. And there I sat, in my car, in the veil of darkness and a full moon over my head, holding this demonic knife, getting ready to murder a small child that couldn't even speak. Tears fell from my cheeks and onto the blade. Hesitation flooded my thought process before I suddenly heard a faint whisper from behind me.
Do it.
I got out of my car, walked into the house. Strangely enough, the door was unlocked, and I was happy I didn't have to interact with my soon-to-be in-laws. Everyone was asleep too. Everything seemed to be in my favor. I walked around the bedroom slowly, making sure not to wake anyone up, especially not the baby. I found the bedroom with an open door and a crib inside. I wasn't even gonna look. I just wanted to get it over with. I pulled my arms back as I got ready to plunge the dagger and end its life. I never felt more regret in my entire life than I did in that moment. It took everything in me not to start crying then and there. I figured Balaam would take care of the rest. I walked out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. I couldn't stop crying after that. I knew I'd never be able to live with this. I looked up at the analog clock in the microwave, 12 a.m. Just in time. The very same shadow figure I'd seen just a day ago suddenly appeared. I did it! Are you fucking happy? I killed it. I killed it. And I'm never going to forget. As I stood there, the demon suddenly reappeared. It had a much more distinct face this time. I clearly remember its eyes. It looked right at me. It had a disappointed look before opening its mouth to speak.
This is the wrong house.
Without a second of hesitation, I took the knife and plunged it right into my own chest with all my might.
Let this be a lesson to anyone who happens to hear this. If you're ever planning on killing a child, make sure you kill the right one.
Ever since the time I was a kid, I was always fascinated by history. I always excelled in it more than I did any other subject in school. I spent most of my time throughout middle school, high school, and college researching stuff on my own accord. No one ever had to tell me to look into this stuff, I just did it myself, and I was always fascinated every time I did. Particularly because the stuff that I would read in, let's say, primary sources and journals and diaries, they often didn't go along with the narrative that we learned in school. I think I was a sophomore in college when I realized that the history that we're taught in school is almost completely a lie. I know that probably sounds weird to most of you out there, and it's not that it's 100% false. It's just that they spin it in a way that it's so biased and propagandistic that you just can't even imagine how they spin it the way they do. It's actually kind of scary. Despite this, I still continued to major in history, and I really didn't want to become a teacher or a professor. I knew that I wouldn't be able to teach the real version of history. I knew I'd be teaching the fake version. So I was pretty excited when I landed a job as a historical site renovator right out of college. Don't ask me how I got the job. It's a weird long story, that's for another time. But I was happy nonetheless. Obviously, living in the United States, I spent most of my time renovating places that had significance to the Civil War, or maybe the early colonization period, stuff like that. So this is basically the way it works. Someone who wants to create a museum, they end up buying some kind of property or building or a house that has some kind of historical significance. Maybe a president lived there, maybe a president died there, maybe a president had an affair there. Who the hell knows? They buy the place, and then they give it to me for a short period of time to renovate it, fix it up, maybe do some research, and then I turn it back over to them, and then it becomes a museum. As weird as it sounds, I really do enjoy my job, and while the money isn't the best, I still wouldn't change it for anything in the world. There was one house that I was assigned to renovate a couple weeks ago that I found particularly interesting. It was an old Civil War house, and I actually lived down the street from it my entire life. Now, I normally found out about the property I was going to be renovating a few weeks in advance, so I had a little while to check the place out and kind of explore around how it was originally, which was pretty cool. That's where my girlfriend comes in. She had one of those ghost hunter YouTube channels. I didn't particularly care for that kind of stuff, but she really enjoyed making it. And although she didn't have more than 100 subscribers, she still was very adamant about, doing that kind of stuff. So it was a no-brainer that she wanted to explore this old, abandoned Civil War house and put it up on her YouTube channel. Knowing that it would be a couple days before I had to renovate it, I decided to say okay, and I figured it would be a cool opportunity to check the place out, which I was going to have to do anyway. So the house itself was actually in the middle of town. Most of the houses around it burned down, and what ended up happening was the town rebuilt somewhat farther away, partly because there were so many graves and people didn't want to build their new houses on top of graves from people in the Civil War. The story I heard growing up was that in this particular place, the Union soldiers, when they won this particular battle, they marched in and they lined up all of the women and children in the town and they shot them at point blank and killed them. Now obviously you can probably guess I live in the South, so it was a very pro-Confederacy kind of area, but still the story stood, and according to most people it was accurate. So one Friday night, my girlfriend and I, having nothing better to do, we decided to go visit the house with her video equipment and stuff like that, and see if we could capture footage of a ghost. Again, it was only a few minutes away, so when we got there, it was really dark. It was so dark. And I remember being so creeped out because the woods, the way they were set up, it was like there were just lines of trees in a weird way, and I don't know. I just thought about people being lynched and killed and shot. I don't know, it felt very real. So when we got there, the door handle of the front door, it was unlocked, so we were able to go right in. The thing I didn't like about these old historical sites was that oftentimes the wooden buildings, the floors would creak, and it would just be this horrible creaking for like every single step. I mean, you shifted your weight even a little bit and you couldn't even hear yourself think. So the visit up to this point was going typically as expected. My girlfriend had a whole bunch of those, "Oh, I felt a chill. Oh, did you hear that? Oh, what's that?" And you know, the kind of stuff that goes into those kinds of YouTube videos. I tried to play along as much as I could, but it was pretty obvious that I didn't believe a word I was saying. It had to have been about 20 minutes into the search that we started hearing whispering. Now again, I'm a total skeptic. I don't really believe in ghosts. I don't really believe in whatever else that people are into. But I swear I heard whispering. And unfortunately, the way it would happen is we would hear whispering from another room, and then we would walk to that room. The creaking would drown out the whispering, and then we got into the room and nothing was there. This happened about 4 times, and we decided maybe it was time to go. At the time, we were actually in the basement, so we started walking up back to the first floor. Then, all of a sudden, the lights came on. Now, there were a few light bulbs throughout the property and throughout the house itself. It was just the weirdest thing I had ever seen in my life, because the electricity had not been hooked up in probably years, decades even. The more I thought about it, the worse and the worse the feeling got. It was the scariest thing ever. And I knew right then and there that me and my girlfriend had to get the hell out. We dashed outside, and despite part of the floor caving in when I ran by, we still made it out, and we were safe. Until we stepped out into the backyard. Right when we got outside and thought we were safe, we spotted something that we were not expecting. There was a large group of men standing around with rifles in the distance. They had to be 30 or 40 feet away, and I had no idea what to make of it. They were almost shadow-like beings. I couldn't make out any features. Couldn't even make out their skin color, what they were wearing. All I could tell was that they were holding rifles, every single one of them. Now, it was a pretty flat, open field in this backyard, and I knew that there was nowhere we could run. We stood there for a while. We just stood there looking at them, wondering what the hell was going to happen. That was when they aimed their rifles and fired. My girlfriend screamed, and I picked her up. I tried carrying her to my car, but blood was everywhere. It was all over my hands. It was all over her body. Everything was happening so fast. I started my car as fast as I could, and I floored it down to the nearest hospital that I knew where it was. By the time we got there, my girlfriend was dead. I couldn't believe it. What the hell was that? I reported it to the police and everything. There was an investigation. They couldn't find any bullets, any footprints, nothing. There was no sign of anyone being anywhere near there, except for us. So naturally, what happened? They suspected me of killing my own girlfriend. The investigation was total bullshit. The cops had no idea what the hell they were doing. I mean, we're out here on a ghost hunt, and I just decide to shoot my girlfriend? Even after I took the lie detector test, they still suspected that I was the one who killed her. So even though I passed the lie detector test, they still suspected me of killing my own girlfriend for no reason whatsoever. Thankfully, I wasn't charged with anything. But I lost my girlfriend. She practically died in my arms. She died in my back seat of my truck, and why did this happen? That is the question that rattled through my mind for months. And why? Why did it happen to me? Why her? Why didn't I get shot? This all happened a while ago now, so I forget the exact timeline, but I was lucky enough that my boss gave me a few weeks off so I didn't have to do any more work and I could try to sort this out and figure out what happened. What happened here? And that's what leads me to this. My therapist said it would be best if I talk about it, try to get it off my chest, and try to sort things out and get it figured out once and for all. But I still have no idea. The only thing that even makes a little bit of sense, the only explanation, is that we came across the ghosts of the Union soldiers who shot the civilians, the women, the children. Maybe that's why I wasn't killed. Maybe that's why she was. I still love history. I still love everything about my job. When I go back, I'm still going to do everything to the best of my ability. As far as everything else is concerned, the only thing that this experience has really changed about me is my opinion of those Union soldiers. First of all, I'd like to say that I've met plenty of truck drivers in my life, and most of them have been pretty pleasant, albeit a little lonely. However, like any group of people, there are gross exceptions. A few months ago, I was driving back to school from visiting my parents. It's about a 2-hour drive, so I usually keep myself entertained with music. I'm 5'3", 21-year-old female driving my dad's little old pickup truck, alone, in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, dorking around to the music on the radio. Suddenly, I notice a semi-truck going the exact same speed as me in the rightmost lane. Embarrassed for getting caught in the dork mode, I stopped singing and dancing and tried to speed up so he couldn't see me anymore. He matched my speed, which ticked me off a little bit, so I looked at the driver, expecting to see some angry weirdo. To my surprise, he was smiling and waving. Thrown off, I kind of chuckled and waved back. Big mistake. He moves over to the middle lane to be a little closer to me, and now he won't stop smiling and waving. At first, I played nice, waving back a little because semi-truck beats tiny pickup truck any day, but I was mostly focusing on getting out of this guy's field of vision safely. I tried speeding up as fast as my truck would allow, about 90 miles per hour, and slowing down as suddenly as I could without endangering anyone behind me, but he would just match my speed no matter what. If there was someone coming up in his lane, he'd move to the right at the last possible second and pass them before I could slow down and get behind them. He has a lot more practice with reckless maneuvering than I do, so he has me trapped and he's using other cars to help him. The whole time, he's smiling, waving, holding up the number 1 sign, finger for some reason I still don't know, and rapidly losing any charm he once had. As this continues for about 5 miles, I got worried and called 911. I gave them a description of the truck: white cargo truck, black cab with some Pennsylvania company logo on it, and driver, balding middle-aged tan guy with dirty blue t-shirt on. They advised me to pull off to the emergency shoulder on the left, but I've never done that, and it looked too narrow, so I didn't feel comfortable doing that. At this point, he was passing someone else in the middle lane, and I finally had a chance to slow down and merge 2 lanes over to the rightmost lane. I started speeding past him so he couldn't trap me again, and the operator told me to take the closest service plaza about 5 miles away. She said he probably wouldn't follow me, so I could stop there for a few minutes before getting back on the highway. She told me to call if he did follow me, but again, he probably won't, so she hung up. Now, he's still holding up the number 1 sign and smiling this creepy, increasingly perverted grin at me while I avoid eye contact. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged behind me right at the last second to join me in exiting to the service plaza. After I get my heart to start back up from the coronary just experienced, I called 911 again. Now, the way the service plaza was set up was that semi-trucks had to use a separate lane winding to the right of the plaza that led to a parking lot behind the plaza just for big trucks. The rest of us used a smaller lane to park immediately in front of the plaza. I parked, and as I'm explaining to the new operator what's going on, I watch the semi creep around its path while the driver stares me down, smiling. I freaked. He knew where I had parked, so he knew where to find me if I just stayed there. I thought maybe I could have floored it to get back on the highway, but I was afraid he would see me and follow me again. So I drove to a gas station to the left of the plaza, which has a view of the semi-truck parking lot, hoping he wouldn't find me until the police came. The operator transfers me to the woman who was helping me before. She informs me that they've dispatched a couple of police cars, but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I see the trucker has gotten out of his truck and is heading towards me. Even though my windows are closed and my doors are locked, I'm panicking on the phone to the operator. She tells me the police should be there soon and I should be safe there, so I should sit tight while I keep her updated. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it's a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. I glared at the trucker and showed him my phone when he came close. He finally stopped smiling and made it look like he was going into the service plaza. I looked in my right side view mirror and found him hiding behind a big white pillar in front of the plaza, staring at me. Again, I freaked out and asked the operator where the cops were and if I could leave because he's being ultra creepy. She tells me to sit tight again because they should be there any minute. So I do. Then he comes out of hiding and starts walking towards my truck. I put it in drive just in case and tell the operator what he's doing. I refuse to make eye contact with him, but I keep watching my mirrors to make sure I know where he is. The smile is back, and he starts walking circles around my truck, looking at it as if looking for a way to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until he circled back behind me, floored it, and told the operator I'm not waiting one more second for the police. She apologized and told me the police would look for the man and talk to him if they found him, and that I should focus on getting home safely, while keeping an eye out for him. I don't know if they did that or not, but I know none of that would have happened if I had my boyfriend with me. So, not only can't I walk alone, but I also can't drive alone as a female. Nice to know. Creepy trucker dude who can't take a hint? Let's not meet. I once asked a famous ghost hunter what his scariest moment was. This is his story. Back when I was in college, the Student Campus Activity Council hired a famous ghost hunter to come speak at our school. I've always loved the paranormal, so I left my skeptical boyfriend behind in his dorm and hightailed it over to the auditorium. The ghost hunter was someone I'd never heard of, but he had an impressive background and seemed to have several things in the works at the time. This was in 2005. I think he actually might have a TV show by now. He was a man of small stature with a little white professor's beard and a receding hairline, but the way he spoke about the afterlife was fascinating. You could tell he truly believed what he claimed to see. Either that, or he was a hell of a salesman. He had us hanging on every word. We watched some interesting video clips of his investigations. He had a nice collection of photos and scary stories to go with them. I remember one about a haunted doll that he said moved freely around the room of the person who had picked it up at a flea market, just not when anyone was around to witness it. Towards the end, he opened up the floor for questions. There were your typical dumbass college kid questions. Have you ever seen someone's head spinning around like The Exorcist? You know, stuff like that. And a few that were actually pretty interesting. I decided I wasn't going to let this opportunity to speak to someone so apparently revered in the field of the supernatural slip away, so I raised my hand. The ghost hunter spotted me, pointed, and smiled. "Yes, you, the girl in the white shirt." "Yeah, hi," I said, and I know I sounded nervous because I felt so dumb for sounding so nervous. "I was just wondering, what's the scariest thing you can remember from your career as a ghost hunter?" I was halfway back in the auditorium, quite a distance from the stage, but I saw his face fall. I know I did. "Well," he said, forcing a tight little laugh. It was forced, I just know. "There are so many scary moments to recall. They tend to pop up quite often when you're in my line of work." This got a little chuckle from the audience. I suddenly felt pretty stupid for asking the question at all. He proceeded to tell some story about tracking a poltergeist in an abandoned elementary school and his flashlight failing. I remember because it really wasn't very scary. At least, it didn't seem that way for someone who hunts ghosts for a living. He moved on from the story and answered a few more questions. He didn't look my way again. When it was over and everyone started to leave, I decided not to get stuck in the crush of students leaving through the front door. Feeling somewhat dejected, like I had done something wrong, I slipped quietly out the theater exit and headed for my dorm. The ghost hunter was sitting outside on a bench near the bike racks, smoking a cigarette. I ducked my head and tried to get by without him noticing. "Hey, kid!" He took another drag and crushed the cigarette out on the cement bench beside him. "Listen, I'm sorry," I remember blurting out, feeling like such a stupid little girl. "I know my question was dumb. I wasn't trying to make fun of you or anything." He shook his head. He brushed the ashes off the bench. He patted the space beside him, inviting me to sit. I hesitated. This could definitely be a case of stranger danger, just like they taught us in the intro to university classes. Then sat down, keeping a healthy distance between us. He was old. I was young. I would probably outrun the guy, or who knows, maybe I was just as stupid as I felt. "I didn't tell the truth," the ghost hunter said. His face looked much older close up, the wrinkles deeper. The confident salesman aura had faded from him, leaving behind a man in his 60s who had clearly seen a lot of things. "That story I told, it wasn't the scariest moment of my career." "I know," I remember saying. He nodded, as though he had known I knew. "This is the scariest moment of my career," he said, and this is what he told me. It was in the 1970s. I was a much younger man. I hadn't reached success in the paranormal industry quite yet, and was left to pick up the scraps that the pros didn't want. Usually, they were schizophrenics whose broken minds tricked them into believing there were phantoms after them, or children playing pranks on gullible and concerned members of the neighborhood. If anything, it was a simple cleansing of the home with sage, and off I went. When I got the first call, I was ecstatic. What the client was describing appeared to be a full-blown demonic haunting, complete with physical manifestations, possession, and multiple witnesses. It was the break I was searching for. It was the break I needed. The only detail that truly worried me was that their teenage son, the person they claimed to be suffering from possession, had become violent with members of his family. Up until recently, he'd only acted out of character, moody. However, a week prior, he had tried to rape his older female cousin. She was shaken, but mostly unharmed. The family sent her to live elsewhere until it could all be figured out. Therefore, when I headed out to their home, I made sure to arrive fully prepared. I brought holy water, crucifixes, sage, and, just for good measure, a small, loaded handgun. I knew it wouldn't come to that, but something about the mother's frantic tone over the phone told me it was just a good idea. I wish I could say the visit itself was exciting. Unfortunately, From the moment I pulled into the driveway of the beautiful remodeled Victorian, all activity seemed to stop. That is, if it was ever there to begin with. I spent 2 weeks investigating the home. I used equipment considered very technologically advanced for the era. I studied energy waves. I interviewed the son whose family claimed to be possessed when in fact he just seemed to be depressed, perhaps psychologically disturbed. I recommended a therapist, a renowned child psychologist who was famous for his work with violent young men. On my last day in the house, they took him into the city for treatment. His parents returned shortly after midnight, retiring wearily to their bedroom, leaving me alone in the kitchen to go over my findings. There was nothing to be said, and I knew it. Everything they described could be written off to the hysterics of a family who couldn't admit their son was in desperate need of medical attention. Everything, that is, except for the drains in the floor. Upon touring the home, I was impressed with how up-to-date it had been brought. It was clearly from the early 1900s and kept in immaculate condition. The woodwork and character of the house was carefully preserved as it was given necessary updates like modern plumbing and electricity. The basement was the only area that seemed stuck in time. The walls were a clammy stone that was prone to gathering moisture, leaving it unfit to store anything vulnerable to spiders or mold. The family had left it empty for this reason, and while it certainly felt very spooky to spend any amount of time in the windowless room with a single hanging light and its vast cement floors, I never recorded anything of note in this area. However, there was one thing I couldn't understand. Given the approximate time the home had been built and its presence in a residential neighborhood, there was simply no accounting for the 4 large slotted drains set in the cold concrete floor. As I sat alone in the kitchen, poring over my meager findings, trying to find meaning in all these words, I heard something. It was only a little sound at first, and so I ignored it. But then it came again, louder this time. There was a steep spiral staircase that led to the second floor, winding up from the corner of the small kitchen, and it was where the noise seemed to be coming from. Assuming it was simply one of the homeowners restless after dropping their son off in an institution, I glanced up. It was coming down the stairs. I can't say walking, because that wasn't the case. It was just floating, as if... floating isn't even the right word. It was just coming down the stairs, straight at me. It had no eyes, it had no face, and yet somehow I knew it was looking at me, right at me, into the very depths of my soul. Then, it spoke. I'm not sure how it spoke. I don't think I actually heard anything, so perhaps it used some sort of telepathy. Either way, I can recall the words to this very day. "You know what he did to us." I didn't think. I couldn't. I just ran. I upended my chair when I fled, scattering papers across the kitchen that claimed this house wasn't really haunted. It was all the hallucinations of a very sick boy. I left them there. Do you know how awful that is? I left those people in that house with that thing. I didn't stop driving for 30 miles, for God's sakes. When I realized how far I'd gone, I finally pulled over and called the family from a payphone. They were the furthest thing from my mind when I saw it. All I could do was respond to the deep animal instinct to escape, to run out of that supposedly safe house with my tail between my legs. They moved. I think. I was unable to continue my investigation. In writing, I cited insufficient evidence, but I knew it was cowardice. I believe the house was leveled a few years later. I ended up doing my own research. Curiosity ate away at me with the vicious little rat teeth as time went by. The accusation still ringing fresh in my ears. "You know what he did to us." And eventually, yes, I did. Old newspaper clippings didn't tie the stories together, not necessarily, but I was able to piece some meaning out of the yellowed excerpts. At some point around the turn of the century, The house had been residence to a well-respected mortician. Unable to find a building in town to suit his needs, he said he built his own home office kind of space. It was a grand feat of architecture and a shining example of a true entrepreneur, a man pursuing the American dream of running his own business. Upstairs, the bedroom, mid-level, the funeral home, in the basement, a mortuary. I knew what the drains were for. Separately, decades later, another well-respected member of the local community was arrested under the suspicion of abuse of his professional position with moral cause. The newspaper didn't elaborate, probably due to the sensitive nature of the crimes, but his punishment was minor. After a brief stay in the local jail, the perpetrator stripped his home of all its value and left town before trial, never to be seen again. It didn't take much to guess the connection. I suppose I don't know for sure, but the words of that thing still echo through my head to this day. You know what he did to us. There was a reason that Mortician felt such a strong desire to build a house that contained his business to suit his needs. The things that were done to these bodies in the basement were unspeakable, but yes, I know what he did to them. And it's because of this, coming face to face with the true nature of man in its darkest places, that the encounter with the faceless thing is the scariest moment of my career. Because now I know. I still remember his expression, the way all the color dropped out of him as he went on, the white hair of his beard barely distinguishable from his pale skin, the slump of his shoulders, the way his voice shook. I apologized. He waved me off. He left. I felt terrible. I still felt terrible for making him relive that moment. But as I grew up, as campus activities were replaced with bills in my own career, the ghost hunter fell from the forefront of my mind, little by little, until last week, when I moved in with my fiancée, when I took the boxes into the basement despite his warnings of spiders and moles, because there's a large slotted drain in the center of the room, and I'm so worried, so scared about what I might know. This isn't a confession. You can't prove a damn thing, so don't even try. I'll deny it to my grave. I'm on my third drink for the evening anyways. You can't trust the word of a drunken man. That's when I start to feel anything these days. The third drink. Sometimes it takes 4, but usually 3 will do. It's the same cycle every night for weeks now. I drink, then I start to feel. Then the fear comes over me. Then I drink some more until I pass out. Wake up, slog through the day, keep my head down, keep my chin up, don't draw anyone's attention. Go home. Repeat. One night a few weeks back, there was a man at my door. I answered it, wondering what in the devil he was doing there at that time of night. I live at the end of my street, and there's no one around for quite a way, and even the evangelicals that comb over the neighborhood rarely make it all the way out to my house. Help me, he gasped, his blood-flecked lips quivering in the rain. His forearm was badly broken, bits of bone sticking out through the skin. He was pale and drenched, the rain and blood dripping steadily from his haggard frame, pooling on my porch beneath him. There's been an accident. I need help. He winced. Can you help me? I nodded, dumbly, shocked at his state, then ran inside looking for my cell phone, but by the time I got back to the door with it, he was gone. The only sign of him, a trail of splattered red leading down my front steps and out into the front yard. I stood there, shocked, for a moment. Then I put the phone away, slammed the door, and locked it. I don't know why. I was just scared, frightened by the whole affair, and some part of me, some damned selfish part of me, kept saying it's okay. It's someone else's problem. He's gone. Forget about it. So I poured myself a drink to ease my nerves, and then another. A few drinks later, I had forgotten all about him, and a few drinks after that, I drunk myself to sleep. I woke up with my head throbbing. I'm not a heavy drinker. Well, used to not be one, anyways. I stepped outside and noticed that there was no blood on my porch and breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe the rain washed it all away, I thought. Or maybe it hadn't happened at all. I went to work, nursing my hangover, but made it through the day, came home, and tried to relax. I had slept poorly the night before, and my day took what energy I had left, so I decided early in the evening to call it a night. I was just about to go to bed when there was another knock at the door. I froze, looking over to it. My heart raced. I tried laughing off my rising fear. It was just someone at the door, nothing to be afraid of. But as my hand reached for the knob, I heard his voice, the same quaking shudder of a voice from the night before. "Help! I need help!" I stood stone still as he pounded on the door. "God, it hurts! Please, why won't you help me?" I put my back to the door, bracing it, squeezing my eyes shut. This isn't real, I thought. It can't be. And after a few seconds, the knocking stopped, and it was quiet. I flung open the door, but there was no one there. No trace of blood or sign of his presence. Unsettled, I shut the door, locked it, and reached for a bottle. And so it went. For 4 more days, each night the same, the knocking, the horrible man at my door, and cries for help. And each night, I secured the door and waited until it stopped, then drank myself into oblivion. By the 7th night, I'd had enough. I made a stiff drink as soon as I got home, and then another after that one. I had thought of nothing but the events of the previous week that day, so naturally, I was anticipating the knocking when it came that night, confirming my paranoid fears. I was waiting for it. I threw open the door upon the first knock, and there he was, battered arm hanging limp at his side, pale face twisted into a grimace. But before he could say anything, I leveled my shotgun at his face and pulled the trigger. His head pops like a blister, and I fired a second time, blowing his arm clean off and leaving a hole in his torso. Covered in his wet viscera, I shut the door. I want to say I was in a trance, that I was on autopilot and out of my head, but that's not true. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was trying to make a point to myself. See, I'm a level-headed man. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural or anything like that. We live in a rational world, and I damn well wasn't going to sit back and let my head play tricks on me without fighting back. They say blood is hard to wash off, but it's not true. His blood washed right off of me. 1 shower later, I was good as new, so when I finished cleaning up and calming down, I went back to the front door. I likewise expected there to be nothing there, as there had been no trace of him left from the previous nights. I couldn't believe it when I opened the door and his remains slumped inside like a sack full of meat. I reached down and poked the corpse. It was solid. The porch was covered in blood and gore. Once more I panicked, and this time I did go into a sort of trance. The hours passed in a blur as I dragged the body around the back of my house, dug out a shallow grave, cleaned off the porch as best as I could, and took another shower. And then I made another drink. Tomorrow, the knocking would come again. I was sure. I hadn't just killed a man and buried him in my backyard. When I got home the next evening, I sat and waited anxiously. Any moment, the knock would come. The man would again be at my door, waiting for me, asking for help. Maybe tonight I'd laugh, invite him in, ask him if he wanted a drink, I thought, sipping my own drink nervously. The minutes stretched out, and it felt like I'd waited an eternity when it finally came. The knocking, that is. I breathed a sigh of relief as I rushed to the door, but it wasn't the man from the previous nights. It was the police. A car had gone off the road the night before. They wanted to know if I'd seen anyone. Maybe it was my drunken state that allowed me to lie so convincingly, but after telling them I knew nothing of it, they bid me a good evening, and they left. My pulse pounded in my head. This couldn't be happening, I thought. It wasn't real. The thoughts piled on, one by one, and all I could do to quell them was keep drinking until I lost consciousness. I called in sick the next day. I checked my backyard, and sure enough, the grave I dug was still there. Still fresh. I dug him up, burned the body until it was ash. When I was done, I went back inside the house and numbly sat down. And since then, I can't feel anything. Not until I drink. Usually 3, sometimes 4. And it's only then that I start to feel the fear. See, I'm not afraid of ghosts. I don't believe in them. I've never believed in them. Probably in part because I was raised by my heavily superstitious mother. She made her living as a psychic, telling fortunes. She claimed that she had the sight, that she could see a person's fate before it happened. And she had a steady stream of gullible clients that kept a roof over our heads and food on our table. So I didn't make a big deal out of it. But, like any kid, I rebelled against her and her beliefs, and when I left home, I found plenty of support for that rebellion. Psychics aren't real, right? No one can see the future, right? 'Cause now I'm afraid my mother wasn't faking it, that she really could see the fate of all those people who came to her. And I'm afraid, I'm so terribly damn afraid, that now I can see it too. My son joined a cult on the deep web. I did my best to be a good father for this kid. I did everything I could. Ever since his mom died, it was hard raising a kid alone, okay? And it's just weird being a father, and it was just weird. It was a mess from the very beginning, ever since my wife died. I didn't know what other way to raise a child. I took a more authoritarian approach, and obviously we didn't get along very well. I tried forcing him to join Boy Scouts and soccer and football, and he just wanted no part of any of it. He just wanted to be left alone and play in his room with his video games, or TV, or eventually his computer. We were still pretty close up until the time he got into high school. That's when things in our relationship, they got really bad. You see, I really wanted him to be in the JROTC program when he got into high school, and he wanted no part of it. Apparently he was anti-military. He didn't want to fight. He thought that he was going to be recruited to the military for some... I mean, what an idiot. I tried explaining to him that's not how it works, but he didn't believe a word I said. He'd rather listen to those conspiracy nut jobs on the internet that say Uncle Sam's going to snatch him up in the middle of the night and take him away to fight in Iraq. Anyway, things got really heated between the two of us when he didn't take the class. I told him that was the one thing I needed him to do for me, and he couldn't do it. Of course, by this time, he'd quit just about every single club and sport I'd forced him into. He was old enough now that he can do that. There wasn't a whole lot I could really do about it. Our relationship, it was basically non-existent at a certain point. He just spent all of his time in his room, alone on that computer. He wouldn't talk to me at all. I didn't know what to do about it. I asked a couple of my friends how I should approach this. I knew a lot of guys that had kids and they went through phases like this, but everyone said, oh, try this, try that. Everything I did to communicate with my son, it didn't work. I got really worried about him. Things started to get really bad between us when he would disappear in the middle of the night, come back at like 5 a.m., get an hour of sleep, and then go to school at 6. I didn't know where he was going. I didn't know who he was with. I mean, what do you even do with that? What the hell? He wouldn't even talk to me. I finally had enough when he decided to steal my car one night and go to God knows where with who the hell knows who. I decided that was the last straw and I was not going to play Mr. Nice Dad anymore. I decided to take away his computer, all of his technology, and he was going to do what I said. I pay the bills in this house and he needed to obey me. Of course, that didn't work. It never does. And at this time, he started to disappear for days at a time with no warning. He would just be gone. Sometimes for weeks. I didn't even know what to do. The first time I thought he had ran away. He still attended school, so he couldn't have gone that far, but I didn't know what to think. I was worried about my son. I tried getting him in therapy, but God, those idiot quacks, they don't know shit from Shiola. Things went on like this for a couple of weeks, and finally, one day, I just decided to scream at him. I was so frustrated. All I wanted for him was a good future, to make something of himself, to think, to be a good person. Is that too much to ask for? With everything I've done for him, all the sacrifices that I've made. I lost my wife and I still continued on to raise this bastard, and now he does this to me. My words fell on deaf ears, because the next day, he disappeared, and I never heard from him again. And you want to know the worst part? The worst part is the very last thing he said to me was, "Thanks for nothing, old man." The nerve that after everything I've done for him, thanks for nothing? As you can imagine, losing my only son, the only family in this world that I had, didn't do me very much good. It was very painful. I still had his computer, so I tried tracking the websites that he visited, but his stuff was still encrypted. I couldn't even sign on to the damn thing. Damn tech nerd. After realizing that was pretty much useless, I decided to hire a private investigator. That ended up being a total waste of money. The guy, he thought it was just a good idea to just go around in town looking for him, questioning his friends and shit. No one even knew. His teachers had no idea where my son was gonna be. This left me in a bad place. I started fighting with everyone I knew. Became more reclusive. I took time off from my job. I started drinking. I didn't know what to do. I needed to find my son. I needed to fix him. If I could just see him one more time, I'd swore I would make things right, and everything was gonna be okay. Well, time went on, and my wishes were not answered. It had to have at least been a month. I was drinking every single day from the time I woke up to the time I passed out on the floor. I was apathetic. I didn't think I was ever going to see my son again. So I had no family. I was going to get fired from my job. I had nothing. Luckily, I had one friend. I had one friend who did right by me. He was a tech guy, and I don't know why it didn't dawn on me to ask him to do this before, but he came over and finally got me into my son's computer. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, because if he had not done that, I was going to end up dead. When I got on there, I was able to see everything that he had been looking at. I gotta say, it was some disturbing stuff, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. I wasn't so much concerned with the weird shit he was looking at. I was more concerned with the correspondence he had with a cult. These people were literally Satanists. I found their site on the deep web. They did some disturbing stuff. They sacrificed animals. I even saw one where they sacrificed a child. I mean, I couldn't verify if it was true or real or whatever, but I mean, why the hell would you put a video like that? I only looked at the thumbnail. It looks pretty damn real to me. I guess all those nights that my son had disappeared, he was going out and hanging out with these Satanists, these devil-worshipping demons. That thought put me into a rage. It was at that point that I decided to stop drinking, stop this feel sorry for myself bullshit. I was gonna find my bastard son. I was gonna fix his ass, but good. He was going to regret the day he ran out on his father. I kept up with this satanic cult. I couldn't see my son anywhere in their new material they released, but I was determined to still find him, and I looked everywhere else. Everywhere. I checked every website I could. I looked all over, every torture show, just because there was a small chance that I could find my son again. It was one stormy night. I was alone in my office, sitting at my computer, as I always did, searching for my son on the deep web. I found him in the last place I expected him to be. So you remember that cult I mentioned earlier? It turned out that they actually had a subdivision in their organization that dealt especially with torturing children on live streams. And what do you know, my son is the #1 child torturer on the deep web. I mean, what do you even do with that? What the hell? I mean, it was one thing when he voted for Bernie Sanders, but this was a whole new level of disturbed. I started watching his streams quite a lot. I watched almost every single one. And as disturbing as it was, I know it was not good for my mental health, but I mean, I had to see my son. I did everything I could to find out where he was broadcasting from. You see, most people associate the deep web torture kind of stuff in basements, right? Everyone thinks there's some kind of creepy, weird basement in the middle of nowhere where this stuff goes on. Well, my son did things a little bit different. He did it out in a wide open field at night. He had a few lights surrounding the area, but I mean, I don't even know how he set everything up. He probably had some kind of generator or God knows what. I did a whole bunch of research on how I could figure out where he was broadcasting from. Apparently, when you do it on the deep web, it's basically untraceable. There was nothing I could do as far as that was concerned. But one thing I could do was figure out where his location actually was based on the planes in the sky. You see, the way the live stream was set up, the camera angle was a bit low and it was pointed upwards. I don't know why they did it like this, and it was just disturbing. I'm sure there's some kind of sick reason for that, but what it allowed me to do was see planes in the background. I ended up triangulating the location based on flight patterns, and I came up with a location. Once I knew, roughly where he was going to be, I had a very hard time deliberating on what the hell I was going to do. Do I call the cops? Am I going to rat out my own son? Do I go there and try to reconcile things with him? And hey, I saw your torture live streams on the deep web. I thought I'd come by and say hi, see how you were doing. What the hell do you even do in a situation like this? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't allow my son to continue doing this. I was going to have to turn him in. I wanted to do it on my own accord, though. I wanted to, maybe show up there and beat him up and take him down to the police station. I knew he was going to rot in prison for the rest of his life, but at least there would be no more children being tortured on the deep web for these sickos to watch, and God knows what they did while they watched this. I made sure I was nice and armed. I ended up illegally purchasing an AK-47 and I ended up also getting a Desert Eagle. I figured that was going to be enough firepower to do whatever I was going to have to do. Surprisingly enough, he wasn't broadcasting all that far. It actually turned out to be only 20 miles away from our house. Of course, it was in a very rural area. I didn't exactly know what kind of living situation he had with these other cult members, but seeing as his stream was the most popular, he couldn't have been too poor off. That site actually got quite a few donations. Every single night he streamed at 9 p.m. and that was when I started to head over there. The streams normally lasted a couple hours. Some of them went to 1 a.m., some of them ended at 10. It depended on how long the kid lived. Sometimes they just couldn't take it and they died too fast, and it's sick, I know, it's disturbing, but I was nervous the entire drive over there. I couldn't imagine what it was gonna feel like to do this. Even if I could. I mean, what if a whole bunch of other guys come up and, shoot me or something? I pulled up roughly where the place was. I knew I was in the right place because there was a very wide open field, and in the middle, I could see some dark figures standing near a couple of lights. I saw some weird equipment. I knew it was them. I knew it was my son torturing some child. I saw if I had crossed over in the forest on the other side, I was going to be able to, get closer to them without being exposed. So I made sure to walk around over there so I'd have the best opportunity to catch my son. I mean, if I just walked out in the open fields, he would have seen me. It took me about a half hour to, cross the entire thing. It was a big field and a big forest, and by the time I did, they were gone. Or, well, I shouldn't say they were gone, but the lights were off, and I was just confused at this point. I stood right there behind a tree, waiting. I knew exactly where he was. He was right at this one spot. I still saw the equipment in the moonlight. I squinted my eyes even more to try and look and see if anyone was there. "Thanks for nothing, old man." The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I'm a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive, but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would be living on my own after school, I was feeling a bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So, it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway, and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decided around then that it'd be nice to try for a more scenic background route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decided to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, then proceed toward the WV line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense, dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains, there were scarcely 10 or 15 feet of visibility. But there are small towns and the road leads me through. It's Friday night though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It had been maybe 9 or 10 p.m., and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the back roads at night. Deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad, but at some point, I'd have to nose my way through foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles per hour or worse, trying to be safe, and it's around 1 or 2 a.m., and there is no cell phone service as I get into a large national forest. There's no other traffic around. There has been little all night, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try not to let myself get too jumpy on the roads at night. But as I'm coming around the car, undoing my belt, I hear voices maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest, and then there's a scrambling through the dead leaves and bushes coming in my direction. It is pitch black night, no streetlights or houses, national forest, cloudy, foggy, starless moonlight sky, and I can't see anything off the road beyond the red glow of the taillights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out and not willing to find out more, I pull back to the driver's side and floor it up to the next hill, happy I left the car on anyway. My heart was pounding. I never found out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for it. A little while longer, and I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watch tower from the World War II days. There's a plaque about it being a community morale builder to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom freaking out and asking if I made it okay. By this time, I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took long and unfamiliar ways in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, she's like that. I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that it will end. She immediately calls me and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call, having just texted her. I tell her I'm home, and she asks, "In Virginia?" And I say yeah, in my college town. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly. I ask why, and she says she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is where I actually was. She said she got this phone call and a gruff young man with a backwoods-sounding voice was telling her he needed to speak to my name and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from West Virginia and knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. A small child answered and swore at her. Then the earlier voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again and saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and am not registered to it, so even if they somehow saw my plates and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station, and that was 5 hours away and in another state. I can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I had stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. I still had all my cards and my ID. It would be an incredibly strange occurrence or extremely elaborate scare prank, either way. I do my best to reassure my mom. I have no idea what that could be about and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and I'm okay despite how troubling I find all this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay and we say goodnight. I pull out of the watchtower and pull off and continue into Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by the 3 a.m. dregs of late-night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry on to that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since, but I have never brought it up with... I carry on to that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since, but I have never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or of the voices in the woods. There's no climax, and there's no resolution. I'm trying to forget this. I was glad to be moving. I never liked my city. It was too loud for me anyway. I looked around at my family members in the car. My parents up front were chatting cheerfully away at what our new town will be like. My father, who was driving the curves of the street very carefully, was offered a lawyer position at the town that paid him double what he made back in the city. My mother, an antique store owner, was happy to be able to open a bigger antique shop in our new town. My brother, sitting quietly beside me, had his headphones plugged in his ear, as usual. He was only a year older than me, a senior in high school. He was the only person in the car that felt bitter about our move. The move into our new house went by quickly. The mover trucks came the next day, and we got down to business. It took us about 2 weeks to fully move into the house. The house was big and beautiful. My father was so happy we could afford it. My mother loved the fact that it was also old. Her antique geek side loved everything about the house. My brother never really spoke since we got there. He just shuffled around the house in the sour mood he took on since he heard we were moving. Myself, I thought it was pretty rad. My room was huge and I was able to put everything in its place. It didn't even matter that the floorboards were creaky. The house was the last house on a large street far away from the city. Beside us was another large house, and beside that was another. All three houses were very aged, and there was a tremendous amount of space between them. My father loved the amount of acres we had. He had plans to build a nice shed and bring in some farming material. "We have to fit in with the rest of the town, don't we?" he always joked. Fast forward, it was our 4th week into the house. The summer air was dry, and the sun beat down into the window of my room. It was an absolutely beautiful day, and I was excited to go into town. I got up and had breakfast. My mom baked muffins and fed us bacon. I always loved her cooking. I got upstairs and hopped into the shower. I cranked the radio up high and sang loudly as I showered. I was in an excellent mood. I hopped out of the shower and started to towel dry my hair. Suddenly, I heard a tapping at the bathroom window. A bird? No, that couldn't have been it. My bathroom window was somewhat small, and it was the faded ones, those kind of windows that you couldn't see outside of. I opened the window a bit and found a tree branch hitting itself against the window. I glanced behind it. Rain. Lots of it. It was so ugly outside. Where did the beautiful sun go? That dry, crisp air was replaced with a gloomy, sad atmosphere. Despair continued to wash over me as I continued to look outside as I got dressed. Our day plans were ruined. Everyone stayed inside that day. We found things to do. We cleaned the kitchen and reorganized the living room to look better. My brother even helped for the first time. "We'll go to town tomorrow. This is probably just a summer storm," my dad reassured me. I got into bed that night, praying we could go out tomorrow. The next morning hit me like a ton of bricks. I woke up in a daze, sticky with sweat. The sun shined in my room, leaving a rainbow pattern on my ceiling. It was another beautiful day, but I felt terrible. Cold sweat ran down my legs, and my head was pounding. I decided to sleep a little longer. I hoped, if I woke up again, maybe the headache would pass. I woke up 3 hours later and still felt sick. Something felt different though. I glanced out the window. It was pouring again. It was worse than yesterday. Fog stuck to my window and I couldn't see more than 3 feet away from the house. Raindrops hit the leaves on the trees violently, causing them to thrash about. Our plans were ruined, once again. Just like yesterday, we stayed inside. We found more things to do. We dusted the shelves, we mopped the floors, we even rearranged the living room again. Rain would not stop hitting our roof. It was disgusting outside. We had no connection to the outside world. We hadn't even had time to hook up our cable or our internet. It was too dangerous to go into the city, let alone have them come out to us. The roads were slippery and it was starting to flood. The rain felt like it was draining my energy. I started staying in bed longer. The 6th day came. The rain still poured. Thunder greeted us with a cackling laugh. We were running out of food in the house, and my brother started to get more angry. We needed to get out, but we were trapped in. The roads were flooded and we still had no connection to the outside world. We ran out of ways to rearrange the living room. I rolled out of bed around 1 in the afternoon. I felt so gloomy lately. I hadn't any energy to get out of bed. I sipped some orange juice and made myself some toast. My mother stopped making breakfast. My father paced around the house. He was nervous for himself and our future. He hadn't gone into work since we got there. He was scared he would be fired, but his coworkers were stuck inside due to the storm, right? The 11th day came, and nothing seemed to get better. The trees became bare from the wind. The sky was a murky, dark blue tint. We were all miserable. The last of our food sat on our kitchen table. We were so hungry. We needed to eat. We sat around the island and finished off what we had left. Finally, the 14th day came. My brother never came out of his room anymore. He just laid in his bed, his eyes never blinking. As always, his headphones were plugged into his ears. I didn't think he noticed his battery. His battery had died 2 days ago. My father was lying on the couch. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He had been lying there for a while. Was he taking a nap? I've never witnessed a grown man napping for that long. Myself. I sat beside my mother on the kitchen table. Her body felt cold and her eyes were shut. She laid her head down an hour ago and had stopped responding to my questions. I'd been living off the crumbs I could find in the garbage. Gross, I know, but what was I supposed to do? For the next few days, I sat beside each individual family member and talked to them. I talked to them about everything. My fears and anxieties about the new school year and the friends I hoped I would make. They never talked back, just listened. It felt good to be listened to. I was sick, skinny with hunger. The house started to smell bad, but from what? We had no food left. What could be rotting? I tried to ask my mom what we should do. She never answered. The rain still poured. It never did stop. I needed fresh air. I needed to get away from that awful stench. Where could I go? It was a disaster outside. I shuffled to the door. I could barely hold myself up anymore. I turned the knob and opened it. The door creaked powerfully and the floorboards underneath me creaked as I stepped outside on the front porch. I suddenly felt like I was in water. Everything was dripping all around me, almost like the world was melting. It was like I had dove into the ocean. I took a few more steps until I was off my porch and on the grass. It felt slimy with the rain. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath. The air was damp, but it felt good going through my dry nostrils. I opened my eyes and... sunshine? It was like I stepped into a whole different world. The rain was gone. Actually, it was like it was never there. The trees were back to normal, with their crisp green leaves. The road was no longer flooded, and our grass was back to a nice bright green. Finally, the sky was light blue, and the sun was shining down on my face. I was confused, to say the least. It was hauntingly rainy before. Now, it looked like a drop of rain hadn't hit the floor in weeks. With the last energy I had in me, I shuffled to where the road started. I turned around, and my dry, red eyes grew wide. In front of me stood our new house, but it didn't look like the house that was there in the beginning. It looked rotted. It slumped down, almost like it couldn't hold up its own weight any longer. I remember seeing it move up and down, almost like it was taking deep breaths. I swear, my eyes were playing tricks on me. Water dripped from every part of the house, and the windows looked steamed, water droplets forming in them. The wood on the roof was starting to peel. I had no energy left. Just like the house, I couldn't hold myself up any longer. I knelt to my knees. I laid my head down on the warm road. It felt good against my cheek, and I could hear the house creaking loudly. I slowly closed my eyes. Excuse me, miss." I heard a voice. I didn't have the strength to open my eyes. "Does she have a pulse?" I felt a cold finger press against my cheek. "Barely." "Do you think she'll make it?" "Let's hope so." I opened my eyes to find myself on a hospital bed. I was so weak, so skinny. I could barely keep my eyes open. A doctor stood at the corner of the room, and he was speaking to a female nurse. "I can't believe she made it," the nurse sighed. "Yes, it was a miracle. She's in critical condition," he said, scribbling things down in a notebook. "Poor girl. Did you hear the sheriff? Her whole family died of starvation." She shifted her weight. She looked uneasy. "I just don't get it. They never even left the house when they got there. It's like they wanted to starve themselves." He glanced over at the window. "Did you hear the rumors? The sheriff went and investigated the fact that no one heard from them since they moved to town. Everyone was buzzing about them, but they never showed up anywhere. I believe people were getting worried." She shifted again. "He found her family stuck to the floorboards of the house. He said it almost looked like the roots of a tree were going into their veins." She hesitated and brought her voice down to a whisper. "They said the house was draining all their energy." "That's a load of bullshit," the doctor's voice chimed in. "A little too high, I suppose." The nurse shushed him. "It's bullshit, just like the other stories of the family before them," the doctor said. "Yes, but don't you think it's weird that it's the second time this happened? We're lucky the girl survived." "Maybe this time we can get some answers." I bobbed my head to the side, lazily. It felt good to be around people again. It had been such a long time since I heard other humans speak outside of the house. I bobbed my head up again and forced my eyes open. "Oh look, she's awake," the nurse announced. Her expression changed, and a smile played across her face. "Good morning, how you feeling?" I blinked my eyes and shook my head back and forth. "Seems you're still a little groggy. That's all right. We'll get you feeling in tip-top shape soon enough," she happily said. I blinked again and nodded as my head fell down. I felt so weak. I looked down at my narrow wrists. My veins popped out, a circuit of dark blue lines running up my arm. Then, in my dazed state, I noticed my veins throbbing. I focused and lifted my wrist closer to my face. Protruding out of a vein was a tiny splinter, exactly the same color as the floorboards of my new house. I want to thank the patrons who support my work. If you want your name in every future video, check out patreon.com/Eric Alden. Link is in the description.